Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I hope all is well. Political reflections, CNN, as President Trump headed to Hanoi's posh Metropole Hotel for his first meeting with Kim in 8 months. He still trusted in the power of his personal diplomacy with Kim, believing he might be able to charm Kim into an agreement once they met face to face. He has a lot of trust in his power of his personal diplomacy, and we've already spoken about that at length. I think Kim thought he had Trump over a barrel as he watched from the corner of his eye Michael Cohen. 4th of March, my weekend article, I touched on India and Kashmir and Pakistan, and I quoted Arundhati Roy, who said the following in the Huffington Post. Kashmir is potentially the most dangerous place on earth, the flashpoint for nuclear war. And Pankaj Mishra has written a very interesting article in Bloomberg Opinion. A community of experts is pushing India and Pakistan toward permanent conflict, he says. Peace appears to have been given a chance in South Asia. Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan, striving to play the statesman, has not only released a captured Indian pilot, but also detained several alleged Pakistani militants. Still, there's good reason to worry that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi might once again ratchet up tensions against a nuclear-armed neighbor as he approaches the most crucial election of his life. Modi's militant nationalism, loudly amplified by Indian television anchors, isn't the only flammable element in a volatile situation. India's burgeoning military intellectual complex also deserves the world's close and skeptical scrutiny. Their jingoism far exceeds the capacity of the Indian military, which an internal report recently revealed is encumbered with vintage equipment. Perched in privately funded think tanks, many of these connoisseurs of surgical strikes do not seem in the least shocked or disturbed that an Indian leader who has, as The Economist put it last week, made a career of playing with fire, was now playing with Armageddon by launching airstrikes into Pakistan. Then he jumps to George Kennan, 1984, arguably America's finest diplomat, was lamenting that the habit of constantly preparing for an imagined war with the Soviet Union had risen to the status of a vast addiction of American society. In India, this is Pankaj again, Hindu nationalist politicians and their sympathizers in the media have similarly turned an imagined punitive war on Pakistan into another vast addiction, and the military intellectual complex increasingly aggravates this national habit. Focused on Islamabad's backing for the militant insurgency in Kashmir, they've successfully externalized a problem that is primarily domestic. The Modi government's resolve to suppress rather than address Kashmiri demands for democracy and civil liberties. A.J. Shukla was one of the very few mainstream Indian writers on security issues to point out that the wider story in a crisis with such potential devastation is that the Modi government has launched a nationwide anti-Muslim agenda that regards Muslims as unpatriotic, Pakistan as a cunning and implacable foe, and Kashmiri separatists as its willing tools. Thus, Shukla argues, Kashmiris protesting against Indian brutality have come to be widely seen as Muslim traitors rather than the manifestations of a political problem that has to be discussed and resolved, not militarily crushed. He is a voice of sanity. I wrote about this over the weekend, saying the Indian subcontinent entered unprecedented territory. We witnessed the first tit-for-tat strikes between India and Pakistan since the 1971 war. And I said the first casualty in any war, which is what he's saying is the truth. And when I dialed up Indian, and I included Pakistan TV, but Indian TV was much more jingoistic, it was mind-boggling. The decibel level was at 11. Planes were shot down. An Indian Air Force pilot wing commander who sports the most compelling handlebar moustache I've ever seen was captured and then released. The Indian Army said they'd killed hundreds of militants in their attack, but has provided no evidence, and Pakistan is suing the Indians for eco-terrorism. Of course, Modi, and this is to Pankaj's point, Narendra Modi is up against an election, and his entire political raison d'etre has been built on the basis of make India, or is it Hindutva, great again. He cannot back down, or it will be a Jimmy Carter type moment. On the other side, we have a neophyte Prime Minister, Imran Khan, whom I must admit has displayed a very deft touch. The Indian rupee has risen beyond 70. It's got a 69 handle. This is the highest since January. And some chartist interprets this as Pakistan's skirmish seemed positive for Modi winning the election. In my article, I started by saying the world is just so fluid and fast-moving, and in fact, the velocity makes me plain dizzy. US has flown B-52 bombers over disputed waters near China, sent a pair of B-52 strategic bombers on 2 separate missions in close proximity to China, in an action that is likely to draw criticism from Beijing, which is currently locked in a trade dispute with Washington. 2 US Air Force B-52H Stratofortress long-range bombers based in Guam participated in routine training missions on Monday by flying through the disputed airspaces over the South and East China Seas. One bomber conducted training in the vicinity of the South China Sea, the other practiced off the coast of Japan. This is the Pacific Command's so-called continuous bomber presence missions. The B-52 maneuvers could further inflame tensions with China. The point is, I'm not sure that Trump is carrying all the folks he needs to carry to get his trade deal, which he's very keen on getting because he thinks it's going to bump the stock market 20%. I take you back to an article I wrote on the 15th of October last year, War is Coming, and I think the important thing is, it is. Can I ask her about the visit of Alexander Nix of Cambridge Analytica to Downing Street in December 2016? Have a listen, Channel 4 News. S&P's Deirdre Brock asked the PM why a reported visit to Downing Street by the former Cambridge Analytica boss did not feature in government transparency data. Of course, Nix is famously the fellow who said it's no use fighting elections on the facts, it's all about emotions. And so the candidate is the puppet he's asked, always, replied Nix. I'm following this chap called @Mims, and he says that a Harvard dropout could create a novel psychological trap for auto-propaganda fueled by a surveillance engine described in corporate newspeak as ad targeting is so weird, it just shows there's no use trying to predict the future. March 2018, I wrote about this and I said, the man in the hoodie, a hoodie is a sweatshirt with a hood, Mark Zuckerberg, is hopelessly behind the curve. And the reason I say that is goes back to something that John Hagel wrote called Net Worth, and in that he has this idea of an intermediary. An intermediary works as an agent on behalf of consumers to help them take control over information gathered about them. However, I said Facebook presented itself as an intermediary, but it's turned out to be an intermediary, and this is its trust gap, and it's hawking all this stuff around without anyone's permission. This paragraph from Zuckerberg's blog yesterday is quite something, Professor Carroll. Have a read, he just doesn't get it. In that same article in March 2018, I said, in an extraordinary boomerang, the US's adversaries have turned social media on its head and used it as a Trojan horse via psychographic profiling and micro-targeting at a mass scale. And that goes back to something, about the defining bifurcations of the future will be the conflict between information masters and information victims, which I think is another point. Now, let's move on to Venezuela. President Trump has made clear to Nicolas Maduro and those around him, all options are on the table, said Ambassador John Bolton on Twitter. Max Abrahams, pro tip, when Bolton says all options are on the table, he means one option is on the table. US has put foreign financial institutions on notice of sanctions if they deal with Maduro, if they facilitate transactions that benefit the government of Nicolas Maduro, which the US called illegitimate. I take it back to August 2018 and other articles when I've said, Trump seems to be relishing his financial warfare strategies and throwing in the odd drone like he did with Maduro. And then over the weekend, I was reading the fantastic meal that Trump and Kim enjoyed before the second meal was aborted. Kimchi, pad kimchi and sirloin steak has got me going. And I asked myself, I'm sure Nicolas Maduro must be asking himself, what did it take to get Chairman Kim a seat at Trump's table? And I'm sure Nicolas Maduro is probably wondering that completely. And the point is this, it took nuclear weapons. And the choice is binary. Dinner, grilled sirloin with pear kimchi marinated tenderloin sirloin with sauce served with kimchi fermented inside a pear, or death. Ask Muammar, ask Saddam. And I concluded by saying, Maduro is, I'm afraid, going down just like Muammar went down, and as did Saddam. Lewis Ludlow, 27, has been jailed after he swore allegiance to the Islamic State as he prepared to drive a van through London's shopping district. This photograph is extraordinary. It looks like a real villain. Well, he is. And that took me back to Camus and these sorts of characters. The Byronic hero incapable of love, or capable only of an impossible love, suffers endlessly. He is solitary, he's languid, his condition exhausts him. If he wants to feel alive, it must be in the terrible exaltation of a brief and destructive action. Very interesting article in the BBC about Huawei, the story of a controversial company. There's a lot in there, it's on the website, do take a look, but it's also referencing the article in January 2018 in Le Monde Afrique, which reported that the African Union's computer system had been compromised. Said that for 5 years, between the hours of midnight and 2 a.m., data from the AU's servers was transferred more than 8,000 kilometers away to servers in Shanghai. This had allegedly continued for 1,825 days in a row. Came to light in 2017 when a conscientious scientist working for the AU recorded an unusually high amount of computer activity on its servers during hours when the offices would have been deserted. It was also reported that microphones and listening devices had been discovered in the walls and desks of the building following a sweep for bugs. More like this all got swept under the carpet. This is a comment from the head of Huawei. When I first started out 30 years ago, we really didn't have any telephones. The only phones we had were those hand-cracked phones you see in old World War II films. We were pretty undeveloped then. And that takes me back to December 2018 when I was writing about the truce dinner. They'd all broke out into applause, and at the same time as they were breaking out in applause, the Canadian authorities were making the arrest of Wan Zumeng, the daughter of the erstwhile founder. Canada confirmed that she was in custody, while the US routinely asks allies to extradite drug lords, arms dealers and other criminals. Arresting a major Chinese executive like this is rare, if not unprecedented. This is sending a signal that there is a new game, said Dennis Wilder. But this is the point I concluded with. An important market for Huawei has been Africa. In fact, Huawei is the bloodstream of Africa's telecom infrastructure. And how this plays out in Africa is now an above-the-radar issue. Jair Bolsonaro is tweeting all kinds of things, and this is a tweet, okay, a golden shower, question mark.